Hello and welcome back to High School History. So in this series, we have already talked about the first 3 chapters from class 12, themes in Indian history. Today we're going to talk about theme 4, thinkers, beliefs and buildings. But before we move ahead, I want you to make note again, if this is the first video of the series you're watching, that these are not sure shot questions. I have only estimated these questions based on previous trends. So if you are one of those students who score very well in exams, only use this as an additional tool. Do not limit yourself to just the questions that I am talking about in this video. But if you have been struggling with this subject, I hope that these material that I am discussing with you here will be very, very useful for you to improve your scores further. So starting with the chapter, on page 83, there is a discussion on the role of Begums of Pople in protecting the Sanchi Stupa. Right? So here they are talking about two Begums of Pople who, without whose contributions actually the Sanchi Stupa may not have survived for us at all. So you may get a 1-mark question on who the Begums were, or a 3-mark question as to how they protected Sanchi, right? Part of the answer you will also find later on in the chapter, where there is talk about how they refused permission to a lot of Europeans who wanted to take away some marble slabs and other parts, gateways, etc. of the Sanchi Stupa to various museums in their own countries, right? So you can also add the points from there. On page 84, there is a statement just under the background sacrifices and debates. The mid-1st millennium BCE is often regarded as a turning point in world history. Now, this question has come a couple of times, and if you remember the discussion from chapter 1, and if you haven't seen chapter 1, I exhort you to go and see this. I'm linking the video just above on the screen. And there is a question where it says the 1st millennium BCE is regarded as a turning point in Indian history. Okay, so you have a similar sentence, but one question is asking you only about Indian history, and the question here in this chapter is asking about world history. So when you read such a question, if such a question comes in your question paper, you must be very careful as to what it's asking. Is it asking turning point in Indian history or turning point in world history? Because the answers are different, and often students confuse between the two, and it's a very easy question to answer. And if you've not understood the question correctly, whether it's Indian or world history, you will end up losing marks for no reason at all. Okay, so this could be a 1-marker. They could ask you one reason, or it could come as a 3-marker. It rarely ever comes as a 8-marker, right? And it's one of the easiest questions to answer from the entire curriculum. Then there is an area about sacrificial traditions, where they are talking about various Rigvedic sacrifices, especially Rajasuya and Ashwamedh. So these two sacrifices you must know. They could come as objective type questions. And then they start talking about new questions. So by the mid-1st millennium BCE, because of urbanization, new concerns are rising, new needs, and the older texts, that is the Vedas, are not always answering these new concerns of people. So this is where the Upanishads come in. So they could ask you a question on Upanishads. What were the Upanishads? What did they discuss? So basically Upanishads started moving away from the materials of the Rig Veda and the other Vedas, and started talking about more metaphysical questions. That is, the purpose of life, why do we die, and what happens to us when we die. So more existential questions. When you reach page 85, here they are talking about the tradition of debates within the Brahminical philosophies. So you have different heterodox sects coming up at this point of time, trying to answer questions related to people's lives in different ways. And often these teachers would meet at the Kutagrashala for debate. So you could get questions on that. So in fact, Gautam Buddha and Mahavir also followed this tradition of debate as well. So this is actually from where this whole heterodox sects, and from where Jainism and Buddhism are actually born. This again would come as a 1 or a 3-marker. Now all of these together, that is how religious philosophies are changing. So they could ask an overarching question where you will need to discuss the Vedic traditions, and then the Upanishadic traditions, and then the debate traditions. If they add all of this, you may get an 8-marker. But usually if they're just talking about debates and discussions, then it will never be more than 3 marks. Coming on to page 88, you have now the beginning of the discussion on Jainism. So they talk about some background of Jainism, the 23 Tirthankars, and what Tirthankar means. And then, of course, you have a very important statement here. The principle of ahimsa emphasized within Jainism has left its mark on Indian thinking as a whole. So, actually, this challenged, this statement could be asked, and you could be asked to justify. Now, it represents a challenge to the Brahminical tradition of sacrifices. And lots of animals used to be sacrificed. So, this whole concept of non sacrifice in Brahmanism actually comes from Jain and Buddhist thought of ahimsa, that everything is life, and we should respect life and we should not kill any animals. Even if they're not sentient like human beings. Then you may be asked about Mahavir's teachings. So these could be 1 mark or 3 markers. Now, usually in the past, they used to come as 4 or 5 markers when you did get questions of this weightage in the paper. I wonder whether they will give this as an 8 marker. They could add with Buddhism and do a combined kind of thing. But I only see this coming as 1 or 3 markers at least this year. Then moving on to page 89-90, you have Buddha and his quest for enlightenment. So there is this whole story about Buddha's experience when he moves out of the palace and he sees, a diseased person, a person who is dead, and a person who's grown old, and then ultimately a person who has renounced the world and looks very peaceful, and that starts him on this quest for enlightenment and knowledge. Now, this could come as a 3 or an 8 marker, where his journey towards enlightenment and his teachings could be combined together and asked. You may also get this as a small objective type for 1 mark. Coming on to page 91 and 92, here Buddha's teachings have been discussed in great detail. So you could get questions based on that, on the Four Noble Truths, the inevitability of death, the concept of birth and rebirth, and the concept of Nibbana. They could give you a sentence saying, be lamps unto yourselves, as all of you must work out your own liberation, right? So this could be about the fact that Buddha was not a very religious person in that sense. He didn't really ever talk about God, and he says that what you do with your life is human agency. So he actually denied the existence of fate, that whatever is kismat, or whatever is written for you will happen, the inevitability. He never talked about inevitability. He said that human beings can chart their own path. So these were some very powerful teachings of Buddha, and you could get questions on that. It could come as objective type 3 markers or even 8 markers. Then between pages 92 to 94, there's a discussion on the followers of Buddha, the Sangha, the concept of Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni, Metta and Karuna. These are again, instructions of Buddha as to how the Bhikkhus and Bhikkhunis of the Sangha must behave. And there's also a section on rules governing the Sangha. So you could get questions on either all of them together as a 3 marker, or even as individual concepts, which could come as 1 mark questions. Then between pages 95 to 97, you have the concept of stupas being discussed here. So what are stupas? They are funerary monuments, coming from Chaitya, Chitta. So these are all things you need to know. They could come as objective type questions. Then the question of why it was built, you could be asked. Structure and parts of a stupa and how they were built. Now, in the past, they have asked 8 marker questions on stupa as well, where they've asked you everything about the stupa, right? So yes, it could come as a 3 marker, where they could ask you only part of the question, or it could also come as an 8 marker. Next, we come to page 98 and 99, where there is a discussion on or a comparison on how the Sanchi Stupa survived and Amravati did not. So here again, there is a lot of role of both some British archaeologists and officers and the Begums of Bhopal, who played a very, very important role in protecting the Sanchi. But there were a few other things which actually helped them in this process, whereas Amravati did not have any of the advantages. So you could be asked questions on that, and this most likely would come as a 3 mark question. Then between pages 99 to 103, there is a whole discussion on the architecture of Sanchi Stupa, where there's a section of stories in stone where you have a discussion on Charan Chitra, so you can get an objective type question on that. The concept of the Shalabhanjika and its role in Buddhist architecture, or at least in Sanchi, you could get a 3-mark question on this. You could get a question on what were the symbols used to represent the Buddha. It could either come as an objective type question or even as a 3-marker. Then there could be questions on Gajalakshmi Maya, the animal medallions, for example, elephant and snake, and how some British art historians felt that this was an area of animal worship. So you could get all of these questions rolled up into one as an 8-marker, or they could come as objective questions or 3-mark questions if they want to look at individual concepts. Then when we come to page 103, here you have the statement in the text that by the 1st century CE, there is evidence of changes in Buddhist ideas and practices. So this is nothing else but the bifurcation of Buddhism into Mahayana and Hinayan practices. There is some references to Tantric Buddhism as well, and also the growth of the concept of the Bodhisattva. So you could get a separate question on the Bodhisattva as well. What was the idea of the Bodhisattva? And in the past, they've also asked a question, as we shall see in the next set of pages between 104 to 5, Vaishnavism, Shaivism and Shaktism, where even Brahminical gods and goddesses are seen as the savior, just like the Bodhisattva. So you can get a question where it kind of compares Bodhisattva and the concept of savior in Brahmanism as well. So you could get 1, 3 or 8-mark questions from this section as well. Especially Vaishnavism could come as a 3-marker because there's quite a detailed discussion on Vaishnavism, and especially the 10 avatars of Vishnu. So this you must know well. Then between pages 105 to 107, you move into temple building techniques and traditions within Brahmanism. The earliest temples, there was a lot of Buddhist influence in these early temples. You may be asked for some examples of some old temples as well, especially from the Ajanta or the Ellora region. Then you have the Devgarh temple of Uttar Pradesh, right? So you can be asked questions like this also. Basically 1, 3 and 8-marker possibilities are quite wide, and depending on what kind of question they've asked, so if it's an 8-marker, they will tag in a lot many more concepts as well. Otherwise, you can definitely look for a 1 or a 3-marker. Then from pages 107 to 109, this is kind of tying up the entire chapter together, especially the last part, which deals with art and architecture. And you have questions about grappling with the unfamiliar. So when art historians of Europe came into India and when they saw all these kind of sculptures, they really couldn't make sense of it. And they felt, my God, what grotesque ideas they have. A human being with 10 arms, or humans with animal heads, or human head and animal bodies. So they really didn't know what to do with this until they started reading the Indian scriptures, whether they were Buddhist, Jain or Brahminical texts. They began to understand ideas behind these sculptures better. But often we also have a situation where the text and image do not match, where you will give the example of Mahabalipuram, that it gives 2 kinds of stories. One could be Bhagirath doing severe penance to get the Ganga flowing on earth, or it is probably Arjun again performing severe penances to get access to divine weapons in preparation for the war of Mahabharata. So sometimes you also have controversial issues like this, where often you have similar kinds of stories or a particular piece of sculpture which can represent not one but more than one stories as well. So again, this section could be asked as a 1 or 3-marker most likely. Unlikely to have an 8-marker, but it could be combined, with other architectural questions and made into an 8-marker. So with this, we come to the end of this video. Don't forget to like and share this video as much as possible with your friends, so that they can also gain in their last-minute preparations for the board exams. And don't forget to subscribe my channel. I'm putting out content very regularly now to get notifications that the content is coming out. If you wish, you may also join the Facebook group, where we would initiate discussions on individual questions. Also, if you have any specific questions from this chapter, you can put them down in the comment section below, and I will get back and answer them as soon as I can. And thank you to Slides Mania, who freely share some amazing templates for Google Slides and PowerPoint presentations. So don't forget to make use of these as well when you're presenting for various projects. And with this, High School History wishes you good luck and goodbye.